Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Country Education Partnership Free Professional Development Summer Series. Today is the first in a three-part summer series. My name is Brendan Ryan. In the spirit of reconciliation, the Country Education Partnership acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Victoria and Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Welcome everybody to the first in our summer series. Our topics today involve technical leadership, managing conflict situations in schools and bushfire preparedness. And before we start the session, I'd like to hand over to the Chief Executive Officer of the Country Education Partnership, Mark McClay, who will provide an update regarding CEP activities. Mark.
Thank you, Brendan, and welcome everyone who's watching the recording as well. Really looking forward to our 3 episodes in the final series, especially today's episode being very topical. CEP's most recent work, we were present today at the Education State reconfirmation around excellence in every classroom. So it was great to hear from Minister Carroll and Minister Blanthorne this morning, and there are certainly some key issues from that the CEP will be progressing and following on. One key item, which is a long-range item that we are debating, is around the impact of the school banking changes a couple of years ago, where it's the major 3 banks that tendered, and that's who schools have to use. But in many rural schools, of course, there's one community bank who stayed and the others have left. So it has created significant issues, and a lot of rural school business managers are in our ears raising the issues it causes around transport and access and all those sort of things. So it's a big ticket item for us, and one that there's not an easy solution for, because it's a government decision, whole of government rather than just education. But that doesn't mean we don't fight to try to get a dispensation or an alternative model for smaller settings when the tenders come up. So advocacy is our biggest work, Brendan, and that's just one item we've currently been working with. So back to you.
Thanks for the update, Mark. Some normal housekeeping items. The session will take exactly 1 hour. Now, we started a few minutes late today, so we should finish about 5 minutes past 5 tonight. This program is, as usual, but is being recorded, so there will be an opportunity to review the session whenever convenient. And I make the point that all of our past sessions are available online and available. If you have a question, then please include that in the chat box, and we'll endeavour to respond to any questions today. Otherwise, there will be a follow-up during the next week. And before you finish and sign off from today's session, please complete the normal survey. We ask everybody to respond to the session through the survey so that it can help us in terms of future planning. So I'll hand back to Mark, who will introduce our speakers and facilitate today's session. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Brendan. So first up today, very excited to have Frank Handy, who is the Chairperson for the Independent Office of Dispute Resolutions. I hope I've got that right, Frank.
School dispute resolution, you've got it all.
Excellent, wonderful. So, yeah, before I pass over to you, we're just really keen, I guess, within your presentation to learn about who you are and what you do. But also the thing for all schools, of course, is probably never to find their way to you.
Right.
And I think something that's stuck with me in our previous conversation was when you said that the number of rural schools that actually get to you certainly isn't significant. So that's a feather in the cap, I guess, for rural schools to how they might handle disputes. But we're certainly keen to hear from you, and I know you are really big on being proactive and what maybe schools can do so that it doesn't end up in your office. So hope I haven't stolen any of your thunder. I'll pass over to you, Frank.
Well, thanks, Mark. That's good, and good to meet everybody. And Kira is going to manage the presentation day, the sharing. So, but the presentation will be available for you as a group. So there's no need to take notes or anything. It's just going to be distributed afterwards. So I thought I'd spend a few minutes on what the office is, because we're not that well known. I need a better marketing agency or something, I guess, in some ways. But and I think we do not get as many complaints coming through the system from rural schools or from country schools as we do from city schools. So I want to make sure that people understand what's available in terms of supporting them in if you deal with challenging situations in the school. So Kira, if you could you call up the presentation? It'd be great. So. Okay. Great, thank you. Okay, so there it is. That's our full name, the Independent Office for School Dispute Resolution. And here, if we move to slide 2, I'll just kind of explain what's different and how it works. So it is a kind of an awkward name, but it is all in the name. So independent is the first thing. We are separate from the rest of the department. I'm a cabinet appointment, a ministerial appointment, and so are the 2 deputy chairs. And the point of that is that we approach things from an impartial perspective. And our experience is that for families is a big advantage for us in terms of being able to have conversations with families. And I'm not saying this is an accurate perspective, but many families feel that the department is all one big thing, the Department of Education. And so if you move from a school to a region to try to talk about a problem or complaint, they don't feel that there's either an impartial view or a separate view, that everybody backs each other up all the way through the system. So being independent was part of the establishment. The idea of the establishment is that there's somebody who's outside the system. So I don't fit in the org chart of the system anywhere, and we report to the minister. Our work is reported in the annual report of the department, but because the department pays for us, but accountability is all through the minister's office. But then the thing that makes us, we hope, attractive to schools is that we're an office. We're not a tribunal or a board or an arbitrator. We don't adjudicate. We don't focus on history, fault, or blame. We don't look at investigations. We don't make findings, none of that kind of stuff. Our goal is different from most dispute resolution frameworks that people put forward. Yep, here, the next one, that's great. If it's possible there. So yeah, so that we focus on resolving the dispute that is sitting in the school. Because our experience with these things is that even if they're resolved or settled in some way, if they're not settled in a way where the relationship between the people gets established to be an effective working relationship, it's going to keep coming back and coming back. An experience of a parent or a family that's negative will get visited on the next school they go to or the next place they end up in the education framework. So our focus is addressing the problems arising from or continuing because of the incident or the situation. So we're trying to create a circuit breaker where we don't go through the whole history of everything about who's to blame. We go through enough history to understand how we're in this position, and then we'll work at how can we make things better going forward. So our 2 goals are there at the bottom: that the child is positively engaged in their education, and that there's an effective working relationship. People don't need to be friends or great mates or anything, but there needs to be an effective working relationship between the school and the family. So that's what we're trying to achieve in our work, which again, for schools, we hope frees us from the sense of, oh, there's liability or blame or responsibility that is inappropriate or unreasonable, or that you have to agree with or disagree with somebody else. It's just, the point is there's a challenge that we're trying to get back on track so the child's education works and the family can work with the school. So that's our reason for being. And typically, go to the next slide, please, Kira. So typically we are dealing with those things that don't fit anywhere else. So it's complex and intractable, and it's after the school and the region have tried to resolve the issue. So we don't deal with everything. We deal with only those things that have not been able to be resolved by the system already. They've got to be suitable for resolution. In other words, there's not threats or violence or people that want to participate, or they're not vexatious complaints. Our job, and we see it very strongly, that we're not trying to create more trouble for the system in handling unreasonable or difficult or challenging people who don't want to participate. We're looking for those people who have the fundamental goal of having their child have a good education and being able to work with the system. So if a parent says, no, I want this person fired, or that person, taken off the rolls of the IT or something like that, we don't work in that area. We're not going to create that risk or liability for anything. What we do is say, oh, okay, well then you go through the normal adjudicative, investigation process if that's what you want. It's only if you want to work with and come up with a solution that you work with us. Right? It's got to be a continuing issue, or a current issue, not one that was resolved in the past, or the family's left the school, or things like that. And lastly, it's not governed by other processes. So we're not something else you have to do. And so if there's a serious conduct complaint or something like that, that goes that way. But any of these other things that would stay with us and don't go over there, we would handle. So we deal with a complaint about something that has happened or is happening, or a situation that's continuing where it hasn't been resolved and it's got complex and intractable aspects to it. So, Kira, thank you. So here's some typical examples that we deal with: access, inclusion, and accommodation of medical and disability issues. And our experience with these is, once they get on a bad spiral, they can stay in that bad spiral for a very long time. Right? So, and the parent and the family seem to have the same dispute over and over again. So, well-being and engagement issues, complaints by parents about schools' discipline of their children, perceived inadequacy of schools' responses to bullying, appropriate support for at-risk or disengaged students, and post-event resets of relationships and support. So if there's been suspensions or something, or even an expulsion in a new school, then we might fit in the space of saying, how do we make sure this will go forward in a different way? And what you'll notice about all of these is the thing that breaks down is the relationship and the communication between the parties. That's what's happened. It's not usually a technical issue where people don't know what they want, or don't know what the solutions are, or what ideas could be implemented. It's that they don't have the capacity to have the conversation they need to have in order to be able to sort that thing out. So that's the area we work in, is resetting and rebuilding the framework in which people can work together going forward. Next slide, Karen. So, and that's I anticipated myself. That's the two things we deal with. The most consistent underlying factors are the parent-school communication relationship is broken down, and the second one is that the complaint management process itself has broken down in some way. And that's too time-consuming, too difficult, too awkward, and you've got a parent and a principal walking through the hallway not knowing how to speak to each other, and what's going on, where is this thing, where is it setting, how can we fix it up? And dealing with those things are things that don't fit into almost any of the other processes. So it's the kind of, the meat and potatoes work of making sure the system, regardless of what the rules are, can actually operate between people. Okay. Sure. So here's how we model, and here's what we work in. So the focus is to relieve the negative impact. The past is a contribution, but the future is an aspiration. How can we make this look better? And in terms of our perspective, as we approach it, in the top right corner, no blame, open to learning, rebuilding connections. That's our goal. Now, that doesn't mean that we say, oh, well, it doesn't matter what anybody did. If something needs to be reset in the relationship and somebody's done something really challenging, like parents, insulted or disrespected the school or something like that, then there's part of resetting is ensuring that people understand, one, that behavior can't go forward, or two, that if they feel those kinds of concerns, here's how they'll be addressed in the future in a different way and how they can present them. Right? So it's not no blame in the sense of not holding people to account for what their future behavior will be. It's saying, look, we're not going to spend time on figuring out who was right and who was wrong. We're going to spend our time figuring out how to go forward in a different way. And you'll see in the bottom right corner, the framework is, it's a voluntary process. It's risk-free participation, in the sense of anything that we talk about will be used in any other framework or any other process, and that people have command over the outcome. So we say this to schools because it's also really critical that we don't work with schools in a way that undermines their authority or responsibility or their statutory duties. Any solution has to be voluntary for everybody. So if it doesn't work for the school and the principal, it won't happen. Right? It has to work for the whole system. And that's often where parents, we do a lot of resetting work with parents about saying, here's the school's duty, here's the school's responsibility, here's the options that are available to you, here's what you want. That doesn't fit, that won't happen. But what can we do that the school will think is a good solution that you can participate in? So we're not in the space of saying, oh gee, let's undermine everything that's happening in the school system. It's saying, how can we fit these two things together in a way that respects everybody's authority and responsibility in the situation? And the role of a parent, for instance, in their input into their child's education. This is especially critical in things like disability management and reasonable accommodation. So you'll see that what we try to do is put the student at the center of this picture, and then you'll see there's a whole pile of, depending on the situation, a whole range of other contributors too, but the focus is not school against parent. The focus is how do we help that student be the center of the work that we're going to do. Okay, Kara, thanks. So I think we went 2. We go back, right. So in terms of outcomes, there's either an agreement that's endorsed by all the participants, or, and this does happen at times when, the school's tried something or the parents have suggested something, but it hasn't worked, where we might say, here's a recommendation for everybody, and that can go forward, and then people can decide whether to do it. But the third thing we do is look, for instance, separated parents often have real challenges in dealing with their revised relationship with the school. So we might make recommendations for kind of systemic improvements. That's an area where we've made some comments to the department about how it handles information sharing and things like that. Recommendations. So even if we've reached a solution, we can say, how can we avoid this happening for somebody else, some other family, some other school, and make things better. Okay. So that's one big area of the work that we do. The second area that we're doing here, and this where we might be, because we don't get so many formal complaints in the rural space, so this might be something you find more useful. But our second goal is to reduce the incidence and severity of conflict in situations that might not get to us otherwise. So there might not be a formal complaint. There might be a long-standing but kind of low-grade, breakdown in relationship or communication. There may be situations that might become complaints, but there's a little bit of opportunity in the moment, or there might be urgency. Something like child's just been taken out of school by the parents because they're upset with the school, and you don't want long periods of time to go by, but there's no formal complaint. There's just an argument at that point. Or situations where typical strategies haven't been effective and staff are looking for additional ideas to help. So that's what we call conflict coaching, which doesn't require us to speak to the parent, to speak to the family. Is simply a call from a school or principal CEO, principal, or somebody who's helping the school to say, have you got any ideas about how we might make this better? Right? And often we find in situations where there's parents maybe have a challenge with their mental health or their neural processing or things like that. We've got ideas and experience in dealing with those types of situations, or we can help the principal and the school in that setting try to set a framework in which they can work more effectively with the parent and not have so much conflict. So that's the second area. And again, that can just be a call out of the blue to us, and we're happy to take them. And the goal of that is to say, can we spend a bit of time with you so that you have more confidence about, or have some other ideas about, or have something else you can try, or this behavior. It may make sense to us because we've seen more of it. It may not make sense to you because you only see it once every 5 years or 7 years, or have never seen it before. Right? So that's the second big area where we want to be helpful for and available and accessible to. And that's simply a phone call to our office if you want some help in those types of situations. The third thing we do, Kira, if we could move forward. Thanks. Is capability building. So we do professional development education programs either on request or, and we're working on building resources for general use. We're working on building some videos, for instance, things like that that'll be available eventually on our website. Excuse me. We work with the academy, and we've done programs for principals. We're working on expanding some of those programs next year. But again, the whole idea of this is I shouldn't have a job. Right? I should be, the theory is that I'll be redundant and unnecessary at some point in the future, which is what I'm hoping for. So, and the last bit is debrief and feedback loops for the system itself about seeing what we see in terms of policy or the way that people plans are implemented, and sometimes reviews of certain situations or actions. If something is consistently happening at the request of the minister or secretary, we might do some research and a report on those types of things. So that's us. That's what we do in general. Is that the last slide, I think, Kira, or is there one? So, I think that's it. So, questions. Excellent. So, but what I could do is just give you 2 minutes on what we think are the 2 biggest things that you can do to help reduce conflict in the school setting. So, number one is that the primary skill that we think is important that we spend a lot of PD time on with people is how can you de-escalate people who come to you in an upset or frantic state? Because they come because they're worried, upset, frustrated, anxious about their child. They say, and in that state, they can't have the conversation that you need to have with them. And so the de-escalation skills of effective listening, managing getting somebody calmed down to the point of being able to have the conversation you need to have is a primary skill. And we do quite a lot of development work and have strategies and resources about those things. But if you can remember in that moment to take the deep breath and first help the person calm down before you take the second step into what are we going to do about it, that's a really primary skill for you to use, which will have an incredibly significant impact on the amount and volume of tension that exists in your school setting. The second is a really strong decision-making process that allows input without losing your responsibility to make a decision at the end. And one of the things we often talk to schools about is, the concept of partnership gets bandied about quite a bit, but I think it's really critical for schools to remember that they have decision-making responsibility and authority at the end. So I never use the word partnership with families. I talk about input, collaboration, support, information. But remember, if you confuse the power and dynamics of decision-making, you'll be generating conflict in the process. So those are the 2 things we spend a lot of time working with people and working with schools to develop the skills to manage more effectively. So that's all I have, and I'm a minute ahead of schedule. So
thank you, Frank. I've got a question. Brendan might have one too, but the thing I love the most is the many questions that I'll get around this topic from small school leaders. I can now refer them to the summer series session 1 and say, and listen in. Just want to ask Frank, is it something, I'm thinking the advice you've given works anyway, but in small rural settings, there's that layer of complexity because someone you might be in conflict with is also, you're on the committee with at a sporting club, you're on a board, they might be your neighbour. So there's, or you just see them a lot more in a rural setting.
In the store, in the only store in town. That's right. So, and I think the key thing about that, of course, is that it's not about you as a person; it's about you in role, right? That's the key reminder and the key thing to keep track of. Because what happens is when those roles get fuzzy, and you're the coach of the local footy team or things like that, and then someone starts talking to you on the sidelines of the footy field and says, "Hey, what about this going on?" It's really critical to remember that that's not the place or time for that conversation, because that's mixing up your roles. Right? And so remembering role at all times, which it can be challenging to do, but to say, if you want to talk about that, let's have a conversation at school on Monday. If you want to this, hey, what's going on with this thing? Let's have a conversation at school on Monday, because you don't want their life to leak into your school, and you don't want your life to leak into the setting, right? That your professional life. So vigilance about minding your role boundaries is really critical. So you maintain what we call the differentiation between role and self that allows you to be a participant in the community without undermining the respect and responsibility that's necessary in your role as school leader, right? Or teacher, or whatever it is. So. And it's challenging to do, but remembering always that it's not about you, it's about you in role. is the key thing to take into any of those conversations because if you lose the boundary, the other people will start to step through it. Right?
Hmm. And my only other one, Frank, when you talk about de-escalation, I'm guessing you talk about things in regard to language, body, location, all those aspects about how to
Yeah.
de-escalate it.
So the de-escalation is so the thing that happens most of the time is someone. Excuse my voice for a second. I'm coming down with a bit of something, so I sound a bit squeaky to myself. But the thing that happens for people when they're upset is four things. One is you don't process information well. Two, you feel under threat no matter what's being said. So, three, it's really hard for you to judge someone's intentions, right? And fourth, you're going to try to maintain the story you have about the situation. So with all those things, it says, well, it's not really useful to have a conversation with a person in an escalated state. So, but the de-escalation is one about noticing they're in that state, which most of the time is pretty obvious. Not always, but most of the time will be pretty obvious. But the second thing is to simply remember that my first task is not to explain the situation. It's not to work because they can't process the information. It's not to make a decision about the situation. My first task is to listen to this person in a way that demonstrates to them that I understand how they're feeling about the situation, and two, why it's important to them. And if I do that one thing, what we know from the science, the neurobiology of it is that that person's self-regulation systems will kick into play because we can't, the worst thing to say to somebody who's upset is calm down, right? So the thing we remember is, how can I help them trigger their own calming down mechanisms? And the two things are to hold a mirror to their emotions and a mirror to what's important to them about the situation. So I know you're worried because you think your son isn't safe at school because he's being bullied. Yeah, as opposed to, the bullying's not really very bad, and he's, had his own 5 seconds to put into it. And so an explanation about the situation needs to come after that person is de-escalated. And that's the primary tool for it.
Thank you. Brendan, anything from you?
Oh, Frank, from a regional perspective, I dealt with quite a number of issues over a period of time, and I felt that there were not clear established policies and procedures in our schools, and
Yeah.
as a result of that, things got off track. Do you provide some advice and some clarity in terms of properly documented strategies as far as the policies and procedures are concerned?
Yeah, I mean, the department has quite a strong suite of kind of standardized policies. I think the most of our work is bespoke because we deal with the ones that aren't typical and for which the typical strategies don't work. But if you've got, if you're finding in a school, for instance, you say, look, we deal with this regularly, we don't seem to have a mechanism for it or something, we're happy to help with advice and support about those things. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we'd be happy, any work that will help increase your capacity and capability in the school and help reduce the incidence of complaints from parents and carers in the state school, we're happy to help with.
But at times, Frank, I don't think those policies or processes are clearly communicated to the school community. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, quite often that's a problem. And then, of course, if you're inconsistent about those, that's creates another source of challenge or difficulty. It's most all accredited schools have a requirement to have a policy. Often they just cut and paste from the department's framework. But I think if the thing about that for you is to create a framework in which people understand what to do, who to approach first.
Yeah.
And then within your skill set as a group, if you've got an AP or if you've got a well-being person, if you got whatever that is, and I realize in smaller schools that's often one person, but then for you to have two good strong things. One is, how do I understand what's happening for this person? And the second is, what's the decision-making process that I can use that will not trigger additional conflict? Right?
Yeah.
And those two things are processes that if you're consistent with as a culture in your school, you will watch conflict go down, the incidents of conflict go down.
Thanks, Frank. Mark?
Thank you, Frank. Thanks so much for today. And as I said earlier, I think this is a session that we'll be able to refer people to have a look at, and then get in contact with your office if they think they wish to access some of those supports. So incredibly valuable session, and we thank you so much. I'm sure you're an incredibly busy person, so to give of your time today for rural educators, we really appreciate it.
Well, it's really good because I don't have enough opportunities to get out to the, I mean, I get out as often as I can to areas, but you know, going from school to school to school isn't very efficient for anybody. So I really enjoy the opportunity to meet a group of people all at once. And Kira, if you want to just circulate that set of slides to, or whatever mechanism you use to circulate the set of slides, it's got the contact details at the end, and we'd be happy to hear from anybody. Well, I often get this, you know, lovely to meet you. I hope I never see you again. So that's how people often respond to having to work with us. But we would be happy to work with anybody and try to support you in managing those difficult situations you might face.
Thank you, Frank.
Okay.
Brendan, and straight to me still to introduce our second.
Yes. Can you just introduce Angela?
Wonderful. So very fortunate today to have Angela Gardner, who's the Senior Emergency Management Officer with the Security Emergency Management section of the department, and her colleague is with her today as well, which is fantastic. So this is a really topical subject, and one that schools, in regard to bushfire preparedness, and when there are emergency management events such as floods and fires and things, that can become very emotive, and schools often have trouble understanding different aspects when, especially compared to local knowledge they may have compared to the system responsibility. So your ability to explain something that can be very messy in a simple way will be much appreciated, Angela, and we really appreciate your time here today. So over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, and I'm really pleased to be joined by my colleague, Eloise Martin. I hope our presentation can live up to our expectations. So let me just share my slides with you all. Is that coming through all good?
Yep, we've got that one.
Wonderful. Yeah, so here today to talk about bushfire readiness in schools. In today's program, thought we'd start by setting the scene with discussing the seasonal outlook, what we can expect into spring and into summer. Then we'll go through some key points about what schools can do to prepare, some key steps in the response phase, and we'll touch on recovery as well. And then we'll wrap it all up together with some call to actions for what you can do today to prepare, and we'll have a little space for questions at the end. So each year in Victoria, in the high-risk weather season, which is typically November through March, we're at risk to a wide range of hazards, especially with the effects of climate change. We can see seasons, the high-risk weather season starting earlier and finishing later. And it's not unusual to experience bushfire, grass fire, extreme heat, severe storm, and flash flooding and riverine in a single season, or sometimes in a single day, like we experienced in February last year with the bushfire risk and the severe storms that went through Victoria. That's why it's so important to have a robust emergency management plan that considers a range of hazards that are specific to your site. But for today's purposes, we'll focus on bushfire specifically, but some of the elements that apply to bushfire are applicable to all hazards in your plan. So what we're looking at for spring is an increased risk of fire in the far west and southwest of Victoria. And this is because they've experienced below average levels of rainfall over the past couple seasons. So there's plenty of dry fuel available, ready to burn. And so that can mean there is an increased chance that the bushfire season could start earlier in those areas. Now, the Bureau of Meteorology is forecasting above median chance of rainfall over the next 3 months, but it remains to be seen how any rainfall we receive kind of affects the areas that are experiencing those drought-like conditions and what that means for the fire season. But we're currently on La Nina watch status, and La Nina is associated with wetter and warmer temperatures, and the Bureau is forecasting warmer temperatures over the next 3 months and into summer. So we'll have a greater sense of the bushfire outlook for summer closer to December. But even in a normal fire season, which is what I think can expect for this coming season, we can still experience dangerous fires and grass fires. So it's important to be prepared. Foundational to how we prepare for bushfire and grass fire is we work with CSIRO every year to give all education facilities in Victoria a fire risk assessment, and education services that are at risk of bushfire go on the bushfire risk register. Those are categories 0, 1, 2, and 3. And then services that are at some risk of bushfire or grass fire, traditionally known as previously as the grass fire risk register, is our category 4 schools. And we rely heavily on the fire danger rating system to help us enact our preemptive action plans for our schools. So in the department's bushfire and grass fire preparedness policy, we outline a range of steps that schools can take to be safe. And part of that is for those services that are on the BAR or category 4 list, they are required to take preemptive actions according to the fire danger rating system. So our BAR and category 4 schools will close when it's catastrophic in the fire weather district, and our highest risk schools, our category 1s and 2s, they will relocate or close when it's extreme in the local government area. And this is one of the main sources of points of confusion or conflict, you might say, for our schools, because that local government area is not available to the public. It's a forecast designed for operational use, and we are supported by emergency services to use that forecast for our school plans, but it's not meant to provide advice to the general community. So it's simply a trigger for our school plans, but we also recognize that the broader community is following the fire weather district advice information. And so we are mindful of that, and we want to support emergency services with that broader community messaging. We are simply using that trigger for our school plans. So how schools can prepare? Well, first, of course, is updating your emergency management plan depending on your fire risk category, whether you're on the BAR or category 4 list, and making sure your preemptive action plans are in place. And then we also really recommend that you have a conversation with staff, because we need to know which staff live in high risk areas or have to travel through high risk areas to reach school. And we also need to know what are staff's personal bushfire survival plans. So the department wants to support staff to follow their bushfire survival plans. And I wanted to highlight that there is special leave available for government schools for any staff that's affected by bushfire, flood, or severe weather. And part of that does include staff's personal arrangements. So that's something to keep in mind, and it's something for schools to keep in mind as well for business continuity purposes. If you're aware in advance that someone's not attending or doesn't plan to attend on certain days, you can factor that into your business continuity planning. Of course, there's site maintenance that all schools need to complete each year, making sure that the grass is trimmed and no overhanging branches from buildings. And we also want to encourage schools to use the communication templates that are on the resources tab of the Bushfire and Grass Fire Preparedness Policy. It's a good opportunity to download that information, or if you're a government school, you can upload it into the EMP portal under the Bushfire Readiness tab and just have all that content pre-populated and ready to go, so that if you do need to enact your plan, you already have your templates filled out and ready to use. And it also helps us all maintain consistency for the community with how we're communicating, because even small variations in how we word things can cause unrest sometimes or confusion for our community. So we're trying to work hard on tightening our messaging. Another tip for your emergency management plan is, when you're working with your staff about building your incident management team, it can be helpful to, when you have roles and responsibilities or certain tasks that each person might need to do when responding, create a little list of those actions and pop it into a lanyard. That way, when you're ready to enact your plan, your staff can put on their lanyard. They can see what steps are required of them. And it can also help if someone needs to step into a role unexpectedly, what they're expected to do. And also, we know that the emergency management plan can be quite long and cumbersome, if you will, but it really is to cover off on a range of legislative requirements. And so everything in there is essential. However, a shortcut that can be useful is to print out your contacts and your response procedures and have that ready to go on a clipboard, so that when it's time to enact your plan, you have that essential information ready to go. And once your plan is ready, it's really important to communicate what your plan is, not the whole plan in its entirety, but just the essential information. And for the bushfire aspect as well, it would be what's your bar category? Are you required to close on certain days? Are you required to locate, and where will you go? And so we recommend communicating this in term 4 as summer starts, and then again in term 1, so that you're capturing people's attention as they come back to school, and any new families as well. And there's a range of ways that you can do this through morning assemblies or newsletters. Some schools take our newsletter template that's on the resources tab and they upload it into the policy section of their website. That way, families can refer back to that as a source of truth and clarity, and in addition to sending out style notifications and things like that. And it's also worth touching base with your local CFA just so that they are aware of the school plans. They know what you're doing. And if they need to support any messaging in the broader community, well, they're already aware of what you're doing, and they're not guessing and potentially providing mistaken information. So worth touching base with your local CFA. And of course, any co-located services on your site so that they're clear on what your school's actions are and that they can make their plans accordingly, and you guys can have a coordinated response together. I'd also like to highlight, in terms of a resource that's really useful, CFA's Bushfire Safety for Workers. It's an online module that talks about the fire danger rating system and how to use the fire danger rating system to travel safely, I suppose. And any of us have to travel to get to work, and probably even more so the further away from major centers that you live. So it's really useful information to refresh our knowledge of the fire danger rating system and how to make safe decisions, as in addition to if there's a fire in the area. And the Department of Education also has e-learning modules available. You can go on to EduPay, LearnED, and search by emergency management, and you'll find a range of related topics to help prepare you and staff. It's also really important to download the Vic Emergency app and set a watch zone around your school. And the more remote you are, the larger that watch zone you should set, so that you have that greater forewarning. And it's important throughout the season that we're using official sources of information. So the Vic Emergency app, the Bureau of Meteorology, and Country Fire Authority are all official sources, because sometimes third-party providers or unaffiliated, unofficial apps, they don't always have the accurate information. And so you don't want to be making wrong decisions about closure or anything based on inaccurate information. There's a range of school program support that CFA offers as well. So I definitely recommend checking out the CFA website. And there's also translated resources on a range of topics that relate to fire safety for culturally and linguistically diverse community members. So if that relates to your school, I would highly recommend being able to offer fire safety advice in a range of languages is a real benefit and asset. And of course, encourage families to have their own bushfire survival plan. When we head into the response phase, we'll be using the fire danger ratings to enact preemptive action plans. The Department of Education provides the local government area information FDRs to the relevant schools. And if there was a catastrophic day in the fire district, we contact all schools and services on the bar in Category 4 and ensure they're aware of the need to close on those days. And this is the opportunity to use your pre-populated templates to let your community know via a letter or Compass style notification. And then on the day, you'll have someone watching or be alert to Vic emergency, but I also want to plug your senses can often be the first notification that you might receive if you hear sirens or see and smell smoke. So your local knowledge is incredibly valuable to your decision making apps, and there's limitations inherently in the data that they receive and the time that they receive it. So don't be afraid to use your local knowledge in your decision making, because that is completely valid. In a life-threatening emergency, if a fire was directly impacting your school, call 000, enact your shelter in place response procedure. If you're just and let parents know what actions that you're taking, because they will be concerned and they will want to know what's going on. Hopefully that is not a situation you ever find yourself in. Most of the time, I think there'll probably just be warnings in the general area. We recommend you seek advice from emergency services about what's the appropriate course of action for schools. And again, to communicate that to parents, because sometimes it's absolutely safest to be where you are with the kids and to not have parents out on the roads in dangerous conditions, in smoky conditions, and it can also impact prevent the fire responders to tend to the fire. So just enact your emergency response plan, seek advice. You're not expected to be an expert firefighter or anything like that. It's just about enacting your EMP, seeking advice, and communicating with those around you. And I also just want to emphasize too that the central emergency management team and the regional emergency management team are actively monitoring warnings as well as, and when warnings come out, we see are any schools in the area and we let the regional teams know. So there's a team of staff behind you supporting you and on the lookout for you as well. When it comes time to recover, and recovery is not a straight journey, but it is useful to first identify, well, what are the needs of my community? And for government schools, a good source of this could be the staff survey or the attitudes to staff survey information. If you know that you currently have an issue with student disengagement, for example, you can expect that it's likely that that issue might increase after a major event. So you might want to have specific recovery planning in place for that. And you can reach out through your SEAL or the health and well-being contact to develop a recovery plan. And the department has a range of BAU support services available, student support and health and well-being programs. And we also encourage you to think about your staff's well-being and their professional development as well. So they may also be affected by the emergency, and they're also trying to provide that support for students as well. So consider their needs and what options and supports are available to staff as well. And communicate would be another piece of advice that we give. It's hard to retain information at the best of times, but especially after a major event. So communicate in different means and methods what recovery supports are available, how people can be eligible, how they can access it, and where they can get that additional information. So yes, and if you needed support with communications in the recovery setting, department communications team can assist with that as well. So I just wanted to highlight again some of the different ways that the department supports schools. We provide a list of excursions every week to regional controllers. So that's why it's so important that you put your excursions into the student activity locator so that we know where people may be in an emergency. We're also monitoring the warnings, like I mentioned, and staying closely engaged with weather briefings and other intelligence that comes from the State Control Center. We have regional and central incident management teams that activate to support in a major event, and we send representatives to the incident regional and state control centers to make sure the needs of the education sector are represented. We have 24-hour support available through the Incident Support and Operations Center. And we also have monthly meetings with our regional colleagues and with representatives from Independent Schools Victoria, the Catholic sector, and early childhood, where we talk about recent learnings and recent events. And if you had anything that you wanted escalated through these channels, you could do so for us to discuss. And of course, we have a range of infrastructure and well-being support services, and we can connect into larger recovery initiatives as well. So what can you do today? Well, I really want to plug our regional emergency management colleagues will be hosting more in detailed training sessions for BAR and Category 4 schools. These will be happening in November, and you can sign up via ARC. For those that participated in our more general emergency management planning session, it's a similar sign up procedure, and we are inviting our non-government colleagues as well. So please do look out for those, and you would sign back up through the regional colleagues you did previously with. But yeah, so today it's really about checking your EMP, confirming your staff's plans, and encouraging them to do the CFA Bushfire Safety for Workers module. Communicating, kind of a theme of today's session, communicating with your staff and your families about what your school's plans are in term 4 and term 1, and touching base with the local emergency services CFA, just to, one, good to introduce if you don't know them already, but two, for them to be aware of what your plans are and they can support you with any messaging. And then be ready to respond with your Vic Emergency app and being vigilant on hot, dry, and windy days, and letting the department know if you need any support. That's it at the moment. Happy to take questions, and also happy to receive questions via our shared emergency management inbox as well.
Thank you, Angela. I'll have a quick one, and then Brendan might. We've got about 6 minutes to go. Probably the one that comes up the most is many of our rural principals live 45 minutes to 60 minutes away from the school. And I know in 2 cases last year, principals found themselves, they actually lived in an area that was white on the app. The school was in a yellow, so it wasn't closed, but they're actually going to have to go through a red catastrophic area to get to school. And more importantly, they were going to be 35 minutes with no phone signal as well. So that, I guess it's that question of these principals are having to make a call at 7:30, 7:15, whether they actually go on the road themselves to get to the site to manage. Does the process allow, I'm thinking there's things that need to be happening at 6:30 in the morning, not sort of waiting till 7:30. Is there an acknowledgement that the on-site person, the school leader, may be having to make those decisions earlier that morning? Or
Want me to jump in, Ange, or do you want to?
Sure. Yeah, if you
I was
want
going
to.
to.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Mark. I'm an ex regional emergency management staff member, so I've been involved in a number of these discussions. On those high elevated fire danger days, yes, the department is aware that decision making is happening in early morning, and we're on deck and checking fire danger ratings as well. For the principals who are in that kind of situation, I would suggest this is now the time to have that discussion with your regional emergency management team. Have a conversation more broadly about your staff and what their plans are, and do some of that mapping across your school and engage with the regional team about sort of those duty of care requirements and that travel side of your emergency management plan. So do it now. Don't be trying to do it on the morning of an elevated fire danger day, but you will find, or you should find it if you pick up the phone at that time of day on a high danger day, the emergency management team is already pretty aware of the situation. Angela, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, just supporting, knowing, I guess that is the situation. Is there any safe workarounds to that? And if there isn't, what is that conversation that needs to be happening with the leadership, other leadership and other members of your team to meet whatever standards are required, but if we know now that is going to be a potential situation, because fire danger ratings come out every morning at 5:30 and every afternoon at 4 p.m. But we certainly don't want people to be at risk, and certainly wouldn't want people driving through high risk areas. So is there another route that can be taken, or do other plans need to be put into place to account for that individual circumstances?
Thank you. Brendan?
Yes, Angela or Louise, I'm interested in the CFA aspect. Many of our rural schools will have staff members that are members of the CFA. And of course, CFA relies heavily on volunteers. What's the current regulations in terms of staff members actually being called out perhaps during the school day and maybe leaving the teaching staff short? There's some difficult situations which I've also come across in the past. What's the department's view concerning that issue?
Well, I'm pretty sure that there is like leave provisions available even for the volunteering aspect as well, responding for an emergency. But I think similar to the previous one, it's about knowing, okay, if we know that staffs are the volunteers and that it is the chance that they could get called up at short notice, is there other business continuity plannings we can put in place to meet that needs if they were to go? Or Eloise, do you have
That's what
an
I was
elaboration?
going. Yeah, no, I was going to suggest something similar. It really highlights these kind of issues and some of the challenges we do face in summer around the staffing. That really importance of doing that pre-planning and having those conversations beforehand, understanding what our duty of care requirements are, and how that translates through to our staff numbers and what we're able to make arrangements around for business continuity, and that's delivery of continuous delivery of education. So for the principals who are in those or facing those kinds of conversations, I would really encourage them to have the conversations now with their staff. And take that conversation to the regional emergency management team if they need further support to come up with a business continuity plan that meets their needs.
Okay. And
Thank you.
yeah, Mark, have we run out of time? Sorry.
I think so, yeah. Yeah, so I guess before I pass back to Brendan, just to outline the section on recovery, the timelines are so critical there that, having been involved in natural disaster myself, I can tell you the smells around fires and floods, windy days, they can be triggers for years to come. And the other one we've experienced in the last 12 months is survivor's guilt from an actual school leader whose house wasn't burnt down and really battled with that survivor's guilt in a community where many had lost their homes. So I guess just outlining the recovery and support is not a 3 or 6 month process in these situations. So
no, Mark, I've been the recovery manager for the last few years. Recovery is a very long process. And a lot of our schools, it's particularly those transition points for our students as well, those recovery needs to escalate. So, yeah, continuously engaging with the services and engaging with SEALs about ongoing recovery plans is really important for a number of years to follow an event.
Thank you. Back to you, Brenda.
Thanks very much, Mark. Thank you to Angela and Eloise for that very important session. That concludes today's program. It's been recorded, I remind everybody, and remember that there's a survey available for anybody that would like to complete the survey that's online regarding the conduct of today's session. Can I also refer to the fact that this is the first in a 3-part series. Our second session is next Wednesday. The focus is quality teaching rounds. That's a teacher-driven collaborative process which has been initiated by the University of Newcastle, something similar to what the older members of the profession would remember as instructional rounds. So I think this would be a very important and significant session there, and I'd encourage people to enrol for that session. So thank you to everybody that has been involved with the delivery of today's session. Goodbye for now.